Hello, you wonderful people. So for today's video, I'm going to talk about the future of the MCU. Just obviously with the whole situation where the movies are heading, everything's leading up to Infinity War and then eventually Infinity War Part 2, even though it's not going to be called Infinity War Part 2, but the fourth Avengers movie. Plus, at this time, there's the whole situation of like, oh, there's the deal talks between Disney and Fox, and obviously that means, what that means for obviously the X-Men joining in. Obviously, like, this is just all that kind of wondering, like, what does this mean possibly for the future of the MCU? And all this stuff I'm talking about in this video, I've talked about in the past, but I'm just kind of bringing it all together just because it seems more and more important to kind of think about and talk about going forward with this whole situation. Obviously, this whole Fox and Disney talk, there's a lot more to it than just obviously the X-Men aspect of it, which everyone's super excited, but like I said, I'll dive into that more. If you're very interested in kind of seeing, at least hearing opinions about what it means beyond that, I'll include a link in the description down below. It goes to a video to Funhaus. They did a movie podcast where they kind of talked a little bit more about what that means from, I guess, from more so from an industry standpoint and what that really means and everything. Obviously me, I'm only focusing more on the X-Men side of things, but if you're more interested in seeing, like, hearing more things about that in general, what that whole dealings could mean, I'll include the video. If you haven't checked out Funhouse, you really should. They're amazing people. They make some funny content. Obviously, they're part of Rooster Teeth and just fantastic. So if you have not checked them out, go check. But nevertheless, instead of pimping out someone else's video, let's focus on what this is all about. What I mean by this whole situation with the future of the MCU, like, I'm curious about this video is going to go in many different directions. Obviously, the biggest thing is obviously like, oh, if Disney acquires the X-Men, that's going to be awesome. But once again, it's going to turn into something I brought up like in the past. Like, I did a video earlier this year talking about, maybe that was earlier this year, but a while back I did a video where I talked about, would that be too much? Because obviously where the MCU is already, obviously there's all the movies, which were well over a dozen movies now. Then you've got all the TV shows, whether it's the Netflix shows like Daredevil, Jessica Jones, Luke Cage, Iron Fist, The Punisher, Defenders. On top of that, you have Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. like next year, well, soon enough, in 2018 is going to be Cloak and Dagger. So it's like there's expansion upon that. That's a lot. And then you throw in the X-Men, which growing up I never realized just how much of the Marvel universe the X-Men make up. You know, they make up a large chunk of it, and so it's just kind of an interesting thing. And there's also the whole aspect of like, well, what do you do when you're adding in something like the X-Men? Because it's like, because I'm assuming that everything that's happening in the MCU, in particular the movies, all of it's taking place on Earth 616, which is like the main continuity for Marvel, across most Marvel comics. And I'm curious to see, like, what are they going to do about the whole X-Men situation? Because it's like, oh, you have all this happening and then all of a sudden, oh, X-Men pop up. Because the question is, like, how would they handle that? Will they just like reboot everything, which is kind of what the thought has been, that they're just going to reboot everything? Or will they kind of do a Spider-Man thing where it's like, you literally had 5 movies prior to this to know about Spider-Man, so we're not going to bother doing an origin story because we already did it twice live action wise. They didn't bother doing an origin story because it's still so fresh in your mind. So I'm wondering, would they do that same thing, or would the X-Men just kind of be reestablished in his universe? Would it be like on a different Earth, since it's already kind of like the multiverse thing has been set up on both Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. as well as like Doctor Strange, especially if you're looking at the main Marvel Cinematic Universe continuity, which that's something I'm going to dive into in a little bit too, about the whole like divergence between TV and the movies. But nevertheless, like, how do you seamlessly include them? Because these movies have been built upon each other. This is an already established universe, and here's the X-Men, which is already another established universe. How do you bring them together without it being too much and too clunky? Like, do you do a little bit at a time? Do you do it all at once? Like, is there a proper way to do it? And at the same time, this is all talks about if it goes through. At the time of recording this, there is no like, it's no like, oh, it's done, it's official, this is like, but the talks are there, so it's becoming more and more of a reality. And like I said, everyone's happy about it. Everyone wants that. Everyone wants to see their X-Men and the Marvel, you know, the MCU come together. It's just like to have the Marvel universe complete, which interestingly enough apparently doesn't count for the Fantastic Four, which I haven't researched into that at all. It's just some stuff I saw, so I'm not going to. Like, obviously, if you're curious, I highly recommend you look into it, but it's something I'd have to research more. But this is just based on what I know right now and the little bit I've seen and I've heard between different people and stuff like that. So that's where all this talk is coming from. Because the thing to me, because it's always funny to me, because it's like, it's something I brought up when the whole homecoming thing was happening. It's like, what does that mean for Spider-Man? Because Spider-Man technically, I think, falls under the category of mutants. because like I've always known him kind of as a mutant because he's crossed over with the X-Men, like in cartoons and stuff like that. Once again, asterisk, not a comic book person, have to say it every time. But the fact is, because there are points where Peter's storyline meets where he like the spider genes inside of his DNA like end up mutating and becomes like the man spider. So there's that aspect. So I've always treated him like a mutant. So that's what I was always like, what are they going to classify him as? He's not an inhuman. I guess they're just going to classify him as kind of an experiment or superpowered person. That's it. So what does that mean going forward? If they did include the X-Men, would that be like, oh, Peter finds out, wait, there's other people like me? Once again, that also determines on whether or not they're doing the whole multiverse thing, which they are, but like, would they conclude the X-Men in this world, or is it just gonna be like, oh, no one, including top secret S.H.I.E.L.D, had no idea that X-Men existed? You know, then on the other side of things is kind of what I'm getting at. It kind of coincides with the whole MCU thing too, is what does that mean going forward for like TV shows too? Because there is the big split, because obviously TV shows and the movies have their own thing, because obviously like the TV shows reference the movies. It's like, it's still a little crazy to me to think like Coulson started in the movies and then went to TV and they crossed over a tiny bit, you know, but it's like the movies never reference like the TV shows at all. So, which kind of, it sucks, but at the same time, it's like, once again, it's that argument I've made in the past, which someone else kind of put that perspective to me, is like, well, the fact of the matter is, that would be too much, because Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. is already in its 5th season now, and it's like, that's a lot of commitment for you asking people to do that on top of the movies, which I'm like, if you really cared, you do it anyway. But at the same time, it's like, not everyone's in a situation where I have the availability, like the time to dedicate to a TV show. To be fair, I've been keeping up with it, but just because someone likes the movies doesn't mean they're like Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. It's like bread and butter, because some people might prefer like something in a movie format, whereas like me, I prefer things in TV format, but I do love the Marvel movies too. It turns into that whole sticky situation. And so obviously there's divide where it's like, obviously the TV shows do their own thing, especially when you look at what season 5 has done. It's done some really cool, interesting things, but it's like, I think it's still a situation of like, it does its own things without going too crazy. It's like, we keep things here, because like most things in the MCU are pretty big, exceptions being like something like Spider-Man Homecoming. It was a very small story plot, and I think that's what coincides with the like Netflix TV shows as well, because they're very small scale. They all take place in New York. It's never like some, oh man, this is like world-changing stuff. It's like, no, this is a small scale story. Now my question is, obviously going forward, you're going to have the whole situation, because obviously Disney is pulling away from Netflix. So by, what was it, like 2019, they want to have all their stuff removed. But there was always talk about, well, what does that mean for like the Netflix Marvel shows like Daredevil, Jessica Jones, and so on and so forth? Well, like the talk at the time I remember hearing is like, well, the fact is that they will stay on Netflix. Beyond that, beyond 2019, well, we don't know. So my question has always been like, what does that mean going forward for those TV shows? Because obviously Disney's going to get its own streaming site, whether that's something that they make themselves or whether they partner up with another streaming service that's available at this time. Like, I've heard another name thrown out there, but obviously I won't say anything because it's not conclusive. I'm not 100% sure, so it just be me, like, you know, I don't want to pass along any misinformation, so I'm not going to include it. But it's like, what does that mean for those TV shows? Will they continue them? But it's like, if they did continue them, would it be okay? Because for Disney, it's like they want a streaming site for all their Disney stuff. So if they did make their own site, you can't put like literally The Punisher next to more Disney friendly family orientated content, because that's Disney's thing. Now obviously the Marvel movies, they push their PG-13, but they never go a little too crazy, you know? So, but you have like the Netflix shows, which can be a little dark, can be bloody, you know, with MA ratings. So it's just kind of like, how would they work? Would they stay on Netflix? Would they, like, you know, after these new seasons come out, would that be the end of everything? And then like Marvel takes those back and does their own live adaptations of those? Do they do animated version reboots or something, or maybe animated continuations? But then it's like, even then you'd have to pull it back. Once again, the Punisher, like I mean, you can handle that in an animated format, but I think you would just kind of have to pull back on certain things. And it's just like, I think the thing is that the Netflix shows have like a good freedom because of being on Netflix. So once again, depending on how that whole streaming site situation plays out, whether it's 100% Disney orientated or whether it's like Disney has a backing in it, but you know, they never, it's not solely Disney like content on specific, you know, streaming sites, especially if they partner up with someone else, then that, you know, I think that makes a big difference going forward. I mean, you know, there's also the situation maybe they would just, you know, like let their shows stay where they are and then they focus on their own like stuff. It's like, oh yeah, like here's some other superhero stuff like we did that's live action kind of stuff, maybe something more on the lines of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. or Cloak and Dagger kind of for their content. Because we also have to think about too is like Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. is on ABC and Cloak and Dagger is going to be on Freeform, which was formerly ABC Family, so that's still all in the Disney family realm of kind of still like, it's not like as bloody and as dark as like the stuff on Netflix. So, and it also begs a question with this whole situation too is what does that mean going forward for a lot of stuff that's in production? Because this kind of goes back to what I was bringing up too about the whole MCU and the X-Men coming together. This applies to both the movies and the TV shows. It's like, well, what about certain TV shows? Like, because currently Fox has like The Gifted and obviously season 2 of Legion's coming out sometime in 2017. I'd expect like February. I don't know if there's actually an official date out yet at this time. I haven't looked it up yet. But nevertheless, it's like, what does that mean for stuff like that? Like, how can they just be kind of casually? I mean, once again, they're kind of TV too. Like, much like the Marvel shows and the MCU, there's a divide. You know, the same thing applies in both. It's kind of like they reference each other, but they, you know, because it's something I pointed out, like The Gifted and, well, it's in particular Legion, it's very up in, like, you can kind of guess the year, but they never get too specific, not to my recollection. And it's kind of like Logan. Logan never once told you like, oh yeah, this takes place in this specific date. It's just kind of like at some point in the future, you know? So just, you know, being very vague with the timeline. So kind of giving more room for a lot of other things to kind of take place without really stepping on other things' toes is kind of what, it's kind of how this whole thing needs to work out. Like, even if, you know, in the grand scheme of like the Marvel and the X-Men thing. I do apologize. I'm all over the place. But getting back to what I was bringing up, it's like, what does it mean for them? Like, you know, because it's that situation of like, if Disney did get them, like people would be scared, like, oh, you put a little Disney touch on it. Would you get something kind of as wild as Legion? If you've never seen Legion, you should check it out. It's a very crazy psychological show, but I feel like, I don't know if they would really kind of like, would like Legion or something get pulled back, you know, would like stuff like the Netflix stuff kind of get pulled back? That's the question. And also the same thing applies, like, would that mean movie-wise, would you ever get like a Logan or a Deadpool if Disney had them? Like, that's kind of been like the biggest concern for a lot of people because those movies are R-rated. It's not like you need an R rating to make those movies good. All you need is a good story, good characters, like good actors and stuff like that. But still at the same time, it's a situation of like that R gives them a little more freedom to kind of do what they want to, just have a little more fun with it in certain regards. So I think that does make a big difference. So it's like, you know, you'd be probably restricting a character like Deadpool or something like Logan from being created. I mean, there's also that situation of there's that new horror movie coming out called The New Mutants, which I knew nothing about. I saw Mutants, I was like, is this like X-Men related? And it seems like it is, and it's like a very horror style type of thing. It was like, but would something like that even exist if like Disney had their hands on it, you know? I'm not going to like shit on them and like, no, you do what you want to. It's your properties and stuff like that. You own the rights to it and everything. But at the same time, it's just like, you kind of feel like once Disney gets involved and Marvel kind of gets its hands on it, which means Disney gets its hands on it, it's like, will they have the 100% freedom that they want to? It's like, no, we got to rein this back in so it can fit into this thing we're creating. You know, once again, this is all about what goes beyond, because like I said, to set us up Infinity War and Avengers 4, and it's like, what's beyond that? Like, what they have planned for that, none of us know. We can speculate and people have their theories, but no one knows until the time comes, like what that means beyond that. I mean, because don't get me wrong, like I said, once again, the X-Men situation, I would love that. Plus, I'd love to see Deadpool interact with a lot of MC characters, especially because I brought it up recently when I was talking about the whole Infinity War thing, especially like, I don't know if they'd ever do it because it might be too silly, but I mean, I feel like it might be an element they could do. Like if Deadpool was introduced, it's like Thanos, Death, and Deadpool, that little love triangle situation. I think that'd be freaking hilarious. It'd be amazing to see that come to live action, but at the same time, it's like, that also depends on whether Thanos is still alive, because Marvel has a tendency to kill off its villains in each respective movie. So maybe by the end of I keep about to say Agents, at the end of Avengers 4, we might see Thanos dead, which I don't know if they would do that or not, considering Thanos is like the big baddie of like the MCU, so that does beg the question, would they do that? But once again, their track record is most of their villains, not all of them, end up dead by the end of their respective movies slash stories. So ultimately we just have to wait and see, because once again, the Marvel movies kind of do their own thing where it's like, oh, this villain is dead in the movies, but it's like that character's still alive and kicking in the comic books and any other adaptation of it except for in the MCU. So a lot of stuff like that. Like, I do apologize, I was all over the place, but like ultimately, like, that is what I'm curious about. That's just what's rattling off in my brain about this whole situation. I'd love to get your opinion about everything. I'd like to know, what do you think? Are you, like, you know, I'm sure everyone's excited about the whole aspect of the MCU plus the X-Men coming together, but what does that mean for the MCU in general? What does it mean for the Netflix shows going forward with this old Disney streaming side possibility? Like, all that, like, what are your thoughts about everything? I kind of laid out my opinion. I'd love to get yours about this subject. Especially, I'm sure there's a lot of people out there who are a lot more well informed about this whole situation. I'd love to be, don't ever like feel like you, like, I'm fine with being like taught about certain things that maybe information I missed out on, like certain things I might be misinformed about. Like, do let me know, and you know, I'd love to continue this conversation because it's just a fascinating thing. Like, you know, just the thought of it, it's making me lose my shit a little bit, because I'm like, that's so sick, that'd be so awesome, you know. But you know, obviously where there's pros, obviously to this whole situation there are cons as well. So just like I said, let me know all your thoughts in the comments down below. But really, that's all I want to talk about in this video. To the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and good